All right, thanks for sticking with me, Core Unum Philosophy cohorts. We look at what we've talked about. We've talked about judgments or beliefs. We've talked about their characteristics as having truth value. We've looked at the different kinds of judgments or beliefs. And we've asked the question, what justifies us in holding beliefs? Or what evidence do we have for them? Okay, having looked at some of those ideas, now we're going to start asking some philosophical questions. And now in this video, we're going to look at questions first about foundational justification, or the direct or basic. Remember, these are the kinds, well, I smell a smell, so I'm justified in my belief that I smell something, right? Or I see the tree in bloom, and I'm justified in the belief that the tree is in bloom. Well, let's ask some questions about these. First question is, well, what sorts of things count as foundational justification of beliefs? You might think, well, if I see something, that counts. If I touch my desk, that sure counts as foundational justification to believe that the desk is there. Well, let's look at this. What kinds of things fall under this category of foundational justifications for our beliefs? Well, of course, you couldn't have philosophy if you didn't have different schools of thought on this. So there's two standard views, and they're not mutually exclusive. Let's look at these. The first would be empiricism, right? Remember, we talked about empiricism in a different context when we talked about ideas. We talked about the source of ideas or the origin of ideas. It means a little. It means it's very similar here. It means something a little bit different. The idea is empiricism. The empirical is based on experience. This would say belief justifications based on experience of one sort or another, right? So what sorts of things count as foundational justification? Something based on experience. Well, like what falls under that? Well, perceptions, right? Perception here is understood as our sense observation of physical things and their properties, right? Things like seeing, hearing, tasting, smelling, touching physical objects and their properties. If you remember way back to our last videos, we call this empiricism 1, right? Our perception of things out in the world. So for example, as we talked about, I'm justified in my belief that there's a tree outside of my window because I see it there. All right, well, what can we say about this? Well, this is the most obvious means of direct belief justification from the point of common sense, right? We see something, we experience something, we're justified in believing our senses. Some empiricist philosophers, though, have insisted that this is the only basic model of belief justification. Seeing is believing, right? And if I can't see it, touch it, feel it, experiment on it, it does not exist, or I'm not justified in believing it. This is actually, when you get to certain things, this gets more and more, there's a popularized version of this, especially if you talk about God. If I can't see it, touch it, feel it, it's not real. Or it's certainly not justified in believing it, huh? But for other philosophers, perception is just one mode of belief justification, right? One of the things that justifies us. Well, what else counts as experience that justifies our beliefs? Well, the experience of our own sense data. Remember, this is taking one more step back into our head, right? So perception is of the world out there, but we're also justified by experience of our own sense data. This again refers to our perceptions, that is our sense observations. However, here, those perceptions are understood to have as their direct objects, not physical things and their properties out in the world, but our sensations of physical things and their properties. This would be, if you remember back, empiricism 2. For example, I'm justified in believing that I am now having a sensory image in my mind of a tree outside my window because I am now, in my mind, experiencing such an image. You see the difference there? We shift that the direct justification is not for the tree existing in the world anymore, but I'm directly justified in my belief that I'm having a sense perception in my mind. It's a little different, huh? It's a little less common sense, for sure. Now, My belief that there actually is a tree out there would actually, under this school, be indirect. It would be an inference from other beliefs that I presently have, kind of the belief that I have in my mind, the sensory image of a tree outside my window, right? So this adds an extra step, right? So the idea is I'm directly justified really just about my sense perceptions, and then I have to infer indirectly that my sense perceptions actually correspond to the world outside of me. Now, some philosophers would actually insist that this is the only pure form of an empiricist account of justification. People like John Locke or David Hume, some names we've already noted. But it's surely not an ordinary way of thinking about how perceptual justification works. We usually perceive a tree and we think we're directly justified that it's there. It also runs into difficulties because, as we talked about in part 1, it seems to leave no place for direct observation of the world outside of us, and thus its position is vulnerable to a rather extreme form of skepticism. Another one we use all the time, though, is our experience of memory. Now, this, of course, we could say a lot about, and we'll have to skip over some of the more interesting pieces here, maybe. We generally feel we're justified in a lot of our beliefs by our experience of our own memory, right? I remember that you gave me $5 yesterday, and so I'm justified in my belief that you gave me $5 yesterday, right? We do this all the time. Without even thinking about it. We go to get our keys, and we believe that our keys are in the drawer because we remember putting them there. This would be an example of an empiricist justification, a direct justification. I'm justified for my beliefs because of my memory. Now, we all have had the experience of our memory failing. So there's a lot of pieces that could be added here as far as inference goes. How strong is our memory? Has my memory failed me before? Am I aware that my memory is failing me? That would all play into this justification for our beliefs based on memory. And then finally, we can talk about introspection, right? This is the direct experience of my own mental states, right? So it's turning in on myself. So, for example, I'm justified in believing that I am now feeling happy because I directly experience the present contents of my own mind. So I just turn in on myself, and I'm justified directly. No one would, if I said to someone, I'm feeling sad, no one would say, well, you're not justified in believing that. Well, no, I'm the one feeling sad, right? It's this introspection. And of course, there's philosophers who've held this as the privileged mode of belief justification over all others. Most famously, René Descartes sought to build his entire philosophy on what he saw as the only really sure foundational belief, one available only through introspection. He said, I think. He turned in, looked at his own thinking and said, I am thinking. That's introspection, and that's a foundational justification because I'm experiencing myself thinking. And from that, he immediately deduced, therefore I am. This is that famous, I think, therefore I am. But again, for other philosophers, introspection is just one of several foundational, basic, direct modes of belief justification. And obviously one that will only justify certain kinds of beliefs, specifically beliefs about my own current mental state. Okay, so again, we're asking questions about what sorts of things count as foundational justifications of beliefs. And we talked about empiricism, right? Experience. Well, there's another school of thought. Again, these are not mutually exclusive. Maybe not all of our beliefs are justified by experience, but some are justified in a different way. We'll call this rationalism. Rationalism says that belief justifications can be based on pure understanding. Pure understanding. Remember when we talked about all bachelors are married? I don't have to get that from sense experience. I don't have to go poll and check out every bachelor. They're all unmarried, and I get that from pure understanding, right? Not from experience. Understanding the meaning of concepts or the meaning of certain judgments are such that immediately generate certain justified beliefs. I simply understand the meaning of words, the meaning of judgments, and based solely on that, I'm justified directly on certain beliefs. Most of these beliefs justified in this way are called self-evident truths, right? If I just know what the words mean, I'm immediately justified in believing them. So for example, things that are definitional, right? Or sometimes they're called analytic judgments. Or another great logical word is tautologies, right? This is the thing like bachelors are unmarried males, right? They're definitional. So all bachelors are unmarried males. That's definitional. It's a tautology. It's X equals X, right? All vixens are male foxes. That's just definitional. That's a self-evident truth. Another example of this rationalism or self-evident truths would be the foundational truths of logic, right? Such as a proposition cannot be true and not true at the same time. A thing cannot be and not be at the same time in the same way, right? If I know what those words mean, I don't have to go look at all beings to understand that that's true. Another example of self-evident truths would be propositions in mathematics, right? 2 + 2 = 4, right? I don't need to go experience all 2's and all 4's to understand that. All right, of course, there are philosophers who privilege this mode of belief, belief justification, as the only true foundational way of justifying our beliefs. The philosopher Baruch Spinoza, for example, tried to build his entire system on the innate concept of substance, the idea of something entirely independent, plus a couple axioms which he thought to be self-evident to any rational mind. So Baruch Spinoza basically builds up almost this geometrical understanding of knowledge. Similarly, Leibniz constructed his system on a set of principles which he likewise took to be self-evident, right? So instead of going to experience, these philosophers went to these self-evident things as the safest way of justifying beliefs. When we come back, we're going to ask the question, well, gee, is there really any foundational justification after all? So is any of this even possible in the first place?